Boyhoods of Great Composers, Book 2. Read by Lena Chan from Lena's Music House. Giuseppe Verdi. Italy was at war when Giuseppe Verdi was born, 150 years ago. Napoleon had tried to win all Europe for France. He took many countries with his fine army, and Italy was one of them. But now at last his soldiers were tired and defeated, and his enemies were starting to drive them back. Between battles, the armies went about the countryside, stealing and killing. Every village they passed was in great danger. One autumn day, the people of a tiny village in Roncolle heard that the soldiers were coming. At once, all the women and children ran for safety to the church, which was the biggest and strongest building in the village. One woman thought that the church was not safe enough. She had a tiny baby and wanted to take special care of him. So she went through a door at the back of the church and climbed the steps to the belfry. Beside the bell there was a little niche, into which she crept and waited. Soon she heard shouts and the sound of heavy boots. In a moment the soldiers were banging on the bolted church door. Then they took a log and rammed the door open. The woman held her breath with fear, but at last she heard the soldiers go away. After that, there was complete silence in the church. At last, the woman carried her baby down the belfry steps. Of all the people who took shelter in the church, she and her son were the only ones unhurt. Later, her husband came home and found them. His name was Mr. Verdi, and he kept the inn at La Roncolle. He also kept a little shop which sold wine and a few groceries. No one there could afford to buy much else. The village lay in the flat and dusty part of North Italy. The fields round it were dry and poor, and the people had very little money. The Verdi's house was on one floor only, with attics and storerooms up above. No other house in the village was any bigger. To see proper houses and streets, the Verdis had to go to the town of Busseto, 4 miles away. Very few visitors came to La Roncolle. One of the few who did was a travelling violin player. He earned his living by playing in one village after another. By day he played in the streets, but in the evening he used to go to the village inn. He usually came there after the children were in bed. But Giuseppe begged his parents to let him stay up to listen. He loved hearing the sad, sweet sound of the violin. It was a rare treat to hear so many new tunes all at once. The violin player only came to the village once in a while. But every Sunday Giuseppe could listen to music in the village church, where there was a choir and an organ. He became a choir boy himself when he was 7. Because it was only a tiny village, they did not sing difficult hymns. But it was his first chance to learn something about music. Mrs. Verdi was too busy with housework and the other children to have time to teach him tunes. In fact, she did not even notice how much he liked music. But she did find time to tell him about her escape from the soldiers when he was a tiny baby. He never grew tired of hearing how she carried him up to the belfry. As Giuseppe seemed a sensible boy, the priest asked him to help at the services. Giuseppe stood beside the altar dressed in a white surplice. He had to hold the priest's books and the church plates very carefully. One Sunday, Giuseppe stood holding the wine and water. The priest made a sign for Giuseppe to hand the wine to him. Just then, the organist started playing a new tune. Giuseppe was far more interested in the music than in watching the priest. He listened in delight to the strange new sounds. Now the priest was ready for the jug and looked across at Giuseppe. But the boy was staring firmly the other way towards the organ. The priest came over and tapped his shoulder. Still Giuseppe did not notice. By now the priest was getting angry, and he gave Giuseppe a hard nudge. Caught off his guard, Giuseppe fell over and rolled down the altar steps. His legs and arms felt very sore when he got up. As he undressed that night, he found he had several large bruises. "How did you get these?" his father and mother asked. Giuseppe told them the whole story. Up till then, his parents only knew he liked listening to the violin player and singing in the choir. He had never told them how very deeply he loved music. Now he said he wanted to learn all about music and make it his life's work. Music lessons cost money, and Mr. Verdi was very poor. But he wanted to do the best for his son. He asked his friends if they could help, and one of them sold him a cheap spinet. This is like a small square piano. The spinet was old and broken, but a neighbor called Cavalletti offered to mend it. When it was ready, Mr. Cavalletti took out his pen. He wrote on a piece of paper and pasted it inside the lid. On it, he wrote, "These hammers were mended and newly covered with leather by me, Stefano Cavalletti, and I fitted the pedals which I gave as a present. I did not charge anything for mending the hammers because young Verdi is so keen to learn to play." Giuseppe was 8 when this spinet was given to him. He took good care of it all his life. In fact, he loved it far more than the fine pianos he played when he was rich. You can see it to this day at a museum in Italy. The organist at La Roncolle said he would teach Giuseppe to play. At once the boy set to work and learnt as quickly as he could. He knew that his father had spent carefully saved money on the spinet. Now Giuseppe wanted to show he deserved it. He spent nearly all his spare time practicing. One by one his friends stopped coming to the house, as he was always too busy to play with them. In fact, he was a serious and rather lonely little boy. But he did not mind, as he loved music best of all. Unluckily, the organist did not know a great deal about music. Giuseppe was such a quick pupil that he soon knew as much as his teacher. Mr. Verdi saw that Giuseppe needed lessons from a better musician, but no one else in La Roncolle knew anything at all about music. Giuseppe would have to go to Busseto. Here the town band played in the square every Sunday, and there was a music club. The club had a choir and an orchestra of men who made music in their spare time. Busseto was also big enough to have a cathedral. In fact, Giuseppe would have plenty of chances to hear and learn music there. So he went to live in Busseto with a friend of his father's, a cobbler. Just about this time, the organist at La Roncolle died. The priest asked Giuseppe to take his place for £4 a year. This was a lot of money to the Verdis, so Giuseppe agreed to come back to La Roncolle every Sunday to play. All the week he went to school in Busseto and practiced his spinet. Then, very early each Sunday morning, he got up to start for La Roncolle. It was a 4-mile journey, and the only way to get there was to walk. Giuseppe used to go barefoot and carry his boots to save them from wearing out. In summer, it was often pleasant, but in winter, it was a terrible journey. There was no shelter from the wind blowing fiercely across the flat fields. Beside the road, there was a ditch full of water. Giuseppe had to watch that he did not stumble into it on winter mornings. One Christmas morning, he did fall in. He was so numb with cold that he could not struggle out by himself. Luckily, a woman passing by helped him onto the road. If she had not gone past, he might have drowned. Giuseppe did so well at school that his Latin master thought he ought to become a priest, but Giuseppe was certain that he wanted to become a musician. One of the leading men in Busseto, Mr. Barezzi, kept a warehouse for wine and groceries. Giuseppe's father used to go there to get stock for his shop and for the inn. One day he told Mr. Barezzi all about Giuseppe and how keen he was to learn music. He could not have found a better person to tell, for Mr. Barezzi dearly loved music himself. He had started the Busseto Music Club and was now its president. In fact, it met in his house. Mr. Barezzi was very interested. After thinking it over, he offered the boy a job in his warehouse. Giuseppe would only work there a very short while each day. He would still have time to practice. This offer meant a great deal to the Verdis. Giuseppe would no longer need money from home. Giuseppe was most grateful to Mr. Brezzi. Up till now, his life had been very hard. Now, for the first time, he could have plenty of warm clothes and good food. He was also asked to come and practice in the Barezzi's house and use Mr. Barezzi's fine piano. He spent more and more time there until in the end, the Barezzis asked him to live with them. In fact, he was soon one of the family and treated like a son of the house. Mr. Barezzi told the cathedral organist about Giuseppe and asked him to give the boy lessons. Giuseppe was now 14 and urgently needed a good teacher. The organist, Mr. Provesi, consented. He was a kind old man, and Giuseppe found him a helpful teacher. Luckily, he was a composer as well as an organist. He had written several operas and many pieces for choir and organ. So he was able to teach Giuseppe something about writing music. One day, the priest who taught Giuseppe Latin was to take the service in the cathedral. It was time for him to start, and still the organist had not come. "May I play instead?" Giuseppe asked. "No," said the priest, but as it grew later, he agreed. Giuseppe climbed excitedly to the organ loft. He played the first part without a mistake. Then he made up his mind to do something bold. At one place in the service, the organist always made up his own tunes as he went along. Giuseppe thought he would do the same and play music out of his own head. After the service, his Latin teacher came hurrying round to speak to him. "Well done, my boy," he said. "You played that very nicely." Then he asked who wrote the music. Giuseppe told him that some of it was his own. The priest was most surprised. "Now," he said, "I understand why you want to be a musician and not a priest when you grow up." About this time, Giuseppe began writing short pieces for the music club and town band. He also began to conduct. Soon he was chosen to be in charge of the band. Although Giuseppe was doing so well, Mr. Barezzi was worried. In Busseto, there was no one with whom Giuseppe could compare himself. It was easy for him to write music and hear it played, but could he tell if it was really good? Giuseppe needed to go somewhere where he could compete with other gifted boys. He also wanted a first-class teacher who could show him how to write better music. In the city of Milan, there was a famous school of music with excellent teachers. But Giuseppe's parents could not possibly pay for him to go there. Even Mr. Barezzi could not afford all the fees. Then he remembered a special fund in Busseto to help pay for the training of poor children. The money had been left in memory of children who had died of plague long ago. There were 4 scholarships, each lasting 4 years. Luckily, Mr. Barezzi knew the men who chose the scholars. He persuaded them to choose Giuseppe and to give him twice the usual amount of money. Otherwise, there would not be enough to pay his fees. He himself would give Giuseppe enough money to pay for his food and his room. So off to Milan Giuseppe went. He was now 18, tall with brown hair and black eyebrows and beard. He had grey eyes and was thin and pale. When he got to Milan, he wrote to the Conservatory, the music school, and asked for an entrance exam. The Conservatory was really a boarding school, and most of the boys were between 9 and 14 years old. Most of them had poor parents and came with scholarships like Giuseppe. But Giuseppe knew that he had to show he was really gifted to get a place at the school when he was already 18. He failed the test. The examiners said he did not play the piano well enough. This was a bitter blow for Giuseppe. In Busseto, everyone had told him how wonderful he was. He had never dreamed that the Conservatory would not have him. Many boys might have given up and gone straight home, but Giuseppe knew in his heart that he could write great music one day. By chance, one of the examiners at the Conservatory knew Mr. Provesi and wanted to do his best for his friend's pupil. He told Giuseppe he should study as a private pupil with a man called the Vigna. The Vigna worked at the great opera house in Milan called La Scala. He played the piano at practices and helped to train the singers. He agreed to take Giuseppe as a pupil and gave him a very thorough musical training. Giuseppe worked his hardest for Mr. Lavigna. He had to prove that the Conservatory was wrong, and he had to show Mr. Barezzi that he was worth all the money that had been given to him. Every now and then he sent music he had written back to Bussetto. All his friends were interested to see how he was getting on, and the music club used to play each new piece as it came. When he was 20, Giuseppe took his master's place at a choir practice one day. The singers liked him so much that they asked him to write a piece of music for them. Soon, he was writing his first opera. Italy has always been a great country for opera. Every big town has its own opera house and opera company. So it was natural that an Italian composer like Giuseppe Verdi should write operas. It was also a help that his teacher worked in an opera house. Verdi became the greatest of all the Italian writers of opera. His operas are still sung at every opera house in the world. They include such famous works as Il Trovatore, Rigoletto, La Traviata, Aida, and Otello. His last opera, Falstaff, was written when he was almost 80, and it perhaps is the greatest of them all. The parish priest of La Roncolle did not do young Verdi such a bad turn after all, when he knocked him down the altar steps, for it was this which made the boy tell his parents how much he loved music and set him on the road to Busseto and Milan.